Welcome to the Legal Insight podcast by HHQ, where we help you unpack the world of law, business, and tech. And today, we're continuing our two-part series on the Cybersecurity Act 2024. And in this second part, we're actually going to focus on the obligations of NCII entities and the consequence of non-compliance. So joining me again are Johnson, the head of Technology Practice Group, and Khai Yi, the co-head of Technology Practice Group. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show.
Good to see you again, Zach.
Good to see you.
Yes, let's dive right in. So when we talk about Cybersecurity Act, I think about safety, security. I think about things like safety and hazard in the workplace.
That's right.
We have the OSHA, where it places the obligation on employer to provide employees with a safe environment to work in. And, that's just in a workplace environment. But when we talk about Cybersecurity Act, which has, nationwide consequences, it has critical implications on industries or entire nation.
Yeah.
Maybe Johnson, you can give us an overview of the statutory obligations of NCII entities under the CSA 2024.
So in the last episode, we discussed a lot about the obligations towards NCII leads. So in this episode, we'll be talking a lot more towards the obligation of NCII entities. So by reading the law itself, by looking through the Act, we can broadly summarize and categorize the obligation into four parts. First obligations is what we call as information disclosure obligation. The second obligation is code of practice implementation. Third one will be cybersecurity risk assessment obligation. And last but not least, something that I think most people are more familiar with will be cybersecurity incident notifications obligations. So there are four main categories, I would say. So maybe I can start by discussing the first one. The first obligation is what we call as information disclosure obligations. So in case you miss out the first episode, just a broad recap of what we discussed. There will be 11 NCI sectors. And then after having the 11 sectors, there will be leaders, there will be leads for each sectors. And then after that, the leads, they are going to designate, they're going to appoint different entities for each sectors. So upon being appointed, upon being designated as NCII entities, so right now, the obligations, one of the key obligations of those NCII entities is whenever they are being requested by the lead to provide any information relating to their NCII, there has the obligation for them to provide any information. So for example, if I'm a bank and potentially the lead is BNM, BNM ever call you, say, look, I want you to provide some information relating to NCI, then you would have no choice but to provide that information. On top of that, the information disclosure obligation also goes to the extent that in the event you are going to purchase new computer or new computer system relating to your NCII, you have the obligation for you to inform your NCII lead. So not only that, in the event where there's any significant updates, significant configurations, significant changes, or anything to do in relation towards the security or operations of the NCII, you have the obligation for you to make the report, for you to inform the NCII lead. So in other words, the moment you are being designated as NCII entity, you must be ready to review relevant information to your lead whenever it's required or whenever you make any new purchase, whenever there's any changes made towards your NCII.
Sounds like a very comprehensive obligation.
Yeah, it's never easy to be fulfilled. I think that's the intention, right? Because of how important NCII is, they want to ensure that whenever you purchase any new equipment, new computer system, they may potentially screwing up and then affecting the whole country, the whole society.
Yeah.
Right.
They want to make sure that if you want to make any update, if you want to make any significant changes, first of all, you must first inform the lead so that the leads, they are in full control. They can oversee and they can supervise and they can prepare in the event there's actual cybersecurity breach or cybersecurity incident.
Yeah, the logic behind it is very simple. If I were to employ or deploy a new system or new piece of hardware, for example, a new piece of computer system, it comes with its own risk.
Yeah.
There will be potentially additional threat vectors or additional cybersecurity vulnerabilities or software vulnerabilities or hardware vulnerabilities that were previously not there, but due to your additional computer systems are now present in your system, which can potentially be taken advantage of by threat actors.
Yeah.
So of course, leads will have to know, right? And then to assess, okay, so your existing cybersecurity standards or cybersecurity measures, do they sufficiently address all these potential threat vectors and vulnerability?
Correct. So a lot of our clients, they just come to us, they just ask us, but in the event that I'm going to make any purchase, so do you mean that I need to inform them? Can I not inform them? The answer is no, because the law is actually very clear. In the event of non-compliance of this, you actually look at geo terms. Yeah.
So I can't just walk into the Apple store, get a new Mac, and call it a day.
Well, if your Mac is somewhat related to NCII,
Yeah.
then that will be viewed that you would need to actually inform them. Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't want a software update causing the crash of entire industries.
Exactly. We have a good example of what has happened.
Yeah, that's right. Khai, maybe you could elaborate on the next two obligation, which is the implementation of codes of practice and the cybersecurity risk assessment obligations.
Yeah, let me just address those two obligations in turn. Code of practice, as we have covered in our last episodes, essentially is a list of minimum standards, right, that the leads have come up with to be adhered to by the NCII entities. So essentially, the codes of practice would set up what are the minimum standards that you need to at least have in place. Think of it like 10 commandments that you see in the Bible, right?
Yes.
It tells you what to do and what not to do, what you must at least have. So while we at this point in time, we don't know what could potentially be in the codes of practice because leads haven't even been finalized, right? The list of NCII leads. But again, me taking educated guess, we would think that definitely there will be elements of incident management and also business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning. All these things are crucial when it comes to ensuring the smooth operations of computer systems or smooth operations of companies. And moving on to the next thing, you asked me about cybersecurity risk assessment obligations. So that's also, in Johnson and my view, another broad category of obligations that NCII entities have. So assuming that you have a set of code of practice, you have actually implemented that code of practice, and then pursuant to which you have a certain level of cybersecurity measures in place to deal with cybersecurity incident or cybersecurity risk. But from time to time, because threat actors are constantly evolving, they are constantly coming up with better malware, finding new ways to exploit particular vulnerabilities or particular software or hardware, for example. So you will always, as NCI entities, you constantly need to do assessment of your own measures against the vulnerabilities that are out there in the wild, right? That could potentially be exploited to the detriment of your system, right? So the assessment is really to check from time to time whether what I have in place are sufficient or not. If it's not, then obviously you have to step up your game. And Johnson mentioned buying of new equipment. So if I buy new equipment, of course, then I have to assess. Is this new piece of equipment going to bring me more vulnerabilities or new vulnerabilities? Then I need to step up my cybersecurity measures as well. So on top of assessment, you also need to constantly do, or rather from time to time do internal audits. And also there will be a requirement under the Act for you to run cybersecurity exercises as well. Think of it like a fire drill, right? Building, we have fire drills on an annual basis. So for cybersecurity as well, you need to have cybersecurity drills just to make sure that in practical sense, your cybersecurity measures can actually withstand threats, cybersecurity threats.
That's a good point. Like, so they say, you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah. So the key is to find out where is the weakest link
and fix it.
So while we're waiting for Moses to provide us the 10 commandments, could you tell us more, Johnson, about the cybersecurity incident notification and response obligations under this act?
Personally, I actually think that these cybersecurity incident notifications obligations is one, if not the most important obligations stated under the law itself. The reason is because currently they are reported almost every day. There will be at least one or two cybersecurity incidents that actually happen to most companies, like it or not. And then it's something that is actually very frequent, and then we foresee. And then there are actually plenty of reports stating that cybersecurity incidents will only increase in the future due to the advancement of technology and then due to the implementation of technology. More and more companies, they are implementing different kind of technologies to just digitalize their products, their services. So under the law itself, the cybersecurity incident notifications, they make a legal obligations for companies within those 11 sectors. In the event where there is any form of cybersecurity incident, they would need to make a report. They will need to inform the NCII lead. Currently, the law itself, they make a strict obligation for the company to do so. The reason is, in the event of any non-compliance, they are actually looking at 10 years jail term. So we can tell that this is extremely severe, and then they are making it compulsory, because if you are not doing so, you're actually looking at jail for 10 years. So this is why I think that all companies have to take this matter very seriously. And in the event where I have already made the notification to the NCII lead, what is going to happen next is NCII lead, they will investigate and then look into the report. They are going to study it, they are going to investigate it, they are going to assess it. And then after that, they will make not only recommendations, the word being used under the law is directive. They will give you a clear directive. How are you supposed to respond to it? What are the measures that you should take in order to address this cybersecurity incident? The word being used is directive, so it means that you don't have a choice to say no. So most of the time right now, in the event of any cybersecurity breach, cybersecurity incident, potentially you will speak to your counselor, you speak to your advisor, you speak to your lawyers, they'll be telling you to do A, to do B. So the moment the act is being implemented in the near future, upon giving the notification to the NCII lead, they'll be giving you the directive, and then you would have no choice but to strictly follow every recommendation, every measure that's being dictated.
When you say there's no longer discretion whether or not to notify, do you mean that whether or not it's a big fire or like a small spark, the entities have an obligation to notify?
That is a very good question. Just by looking at the law itself, unlike different countries, they do have certain kind of measurements, and then they do have certain thresholds,
yes,
and so to determine the gravity and how serious the incident is. But the reading of the law, the literal interpretations is that any form of cybersecurity incident, there's an obligation for you to report.
The level of vigilance is very high here.
Yes, correct.
So maybe Khai,
Yeah.
given the huge or onerous responsibility NCII entities now have, what are the consequences if they fail to comply even one of those obligations?
Yeah, the CSA really takes non-compliance of the Act very, very seriously. And the reason for that is very simple. In the last episode, we spoke about what is NCII, right? Given how critical NCII is to the economy of a country, compromise of an NCII would really lead to impairment of the economy of a country. So naturally, flowing from that, if an NCI entity doesn't fully comply with the Act, the penalty is going to be very, very severe. And based on our assessment and our analysis of the Act, right, we can generally see two categories of penalties. One set for non-compliance of slightly less severe obligations, and one set of penalties for major breaches, in a sense, right? The lesser obligations, non-compliance, would typically lead to fine of up to 100,000 or 200,000 ringgit. And some of them may not even have an imprisonment term. Those with imprisonment term would only carry a maximum amount of 3 years of imprisonment, right? So it's always a combination of fine or imprisonment. And that's for the less critical non-compliance of less critical obligations. But the really major breaches typically carry a fine of up to 500,000 and also jail terms of up to a maximum of 10 years or potentially both. And just to give some flavor as to what are being considered as major obligations under the CSA, non-compliance of code of practice. So we say just now code of practice is like the 10 commandments. So if you don't comply with that, naturally it will have dire consequences, and hence
jail 10 years.
And hence that particular non-compliance actually carries the more severe penalties, right? And number two is actually what Johnson mentioned just now, one of the most critical obligations of NCI entities, which is to notify leads, NCI leads, and also chief executive of NACSA of cybersecurity incident. Because again, if your computer system, if your NCI are being compromised, right, and potentially other sectors, NCII entities of the other sectors also uses the same hardware or the same software that you use, right? So naturally, the same exploits can be replicated or can be used in those sectors as well. Hence, notification is key here, so that preventive measures can be taken in the other sectors as well. So the third obligations that carry severe penalties under the CSA would be the cybersecurity service providers providing cybersecurity services without a license, right? So these are the heavier, these are the sets of penalties under the Act. And of course, to highlight again how serious our country is taking cybersecurity, it also imposes personal liability on the management of NCII entities, right? So directors and management personnel, they can actually be personally liable for non-compliance of the Act, unless, of course, they can show that they have done their due diligence, they have put in sufficient measures within their organizations to ensure that cybersecurity measures are in place, to ensure that the obligations under the CSA are constantly adhered to, right? So then only they may potentially be absolved of personal liabilities.
Those are quite serious consequences. Even when you say less severe, it's imprisonment up to 3 years.
Correct.
That's no small feat.
Can you imagine that just because there's a breach and then just because you refuse to notify and then suddenly you are looking at jail terms for 10 years?
That's strict.
Because some companies, they definitely don't want negative publicity.
Correct.
So if they were to notify and words were to go out, right, that hey, my company has just suffered a breach, that may cause maybe their share price to drop, right?
Correct.
So they may then choose to perhaps let's just be hush about it. We will pay off ransomware, for example.
Yes.
And then words go out. Then I think this is a clear case of negligent or rather deliberate non-compliance on the part of the management personnel. So you can carry jail terms.
Never pay ransomware. That's
rule
number one.
That's the golden rule, but at the same time, the hands might be tied.
Might be tight.
That's true. So I'm thinking right now, just based off this conversation, there's a lot of obligation on employers in these entities to also train your staff to notify these incidents, because there could be small incidents that can spark a huge forest fire. That's a lot to think about. So given these serious consequences, Johnson, what advice would you give to companies that may be designated as NCII entities in the near future?
At this moment, our advice to any companies is really the 4 steps. Number 1 is definitely education. So right now, I mean, we have spoken to quite a number of senior management. So the first mindset when I heard about this CSA Cybersecurity Act 2024, the first thing is this is just another potential PDPA, this is just potential paper tiger, nothing will happen. I'll just ignore it because we have been having cybersecurity for so long and then we never notify anyone and then no one will ever get into trouble. So number 1 is education. To let them know that our government, our country, we are right now very certain that we want to enforce, we want to regulate, we want to establish this law with only one intention, which is to enhance our national cybersecurity. So to really let them understand that the how severe and how serious in the event of non-compliance. So the moment they understand that, look, if there is really a cybersecurity breach, for example, if there's a real breach and then I myself, being a director, I have full knowledge and then I give the instructions to my employee, telling them that no, just hide under the carpet and then there's no need for you to make any notifications. The next thing that you'll be seeing, potentially, you'll be in jail. So the first thing and the most important thing is to provide training for C-level management. It's important for them to understand what is this law about, the intention of this law, and then how severe it is. Because most of the law, they think that they can be settled with money. And then after all, this is Malaysia. So a lot of time, we are just looking at fine. Imprisonment is not something that is actually very common in Malaysia. But right now, when we are talking about cybersecurity, they have to understand this is not something that we are only talking about fine alone. It's not about just 100K, 200K. We are talking about life imprisonment upon the directors themselves. So number 2, after the directors, after the C-levels management has been well educated, number 2 is definitely the training provided for the entire company. Because everyone within the company, especially the IT team, they have to be well educated. The reason is because in the event of any cybersecurity breach, like what we mentioned earlier, in the event that they have to purchase new computer system relating to NCII, they have to know what they're supposed to do next. So they would need to have the awareness and education to understand the importance for them to carry a role to comply with the law. So that is step 2. Step 3 is they will need to engage like professional, like lawyers, for us to audit their processes. For us to ensure that whatever they are doing, the processes, the operation within the company, in one way or another, comply with the law itself. So last but not least, I would say that the most important part is to actually get lawyers first to actually draft something that we constantly provide for our clients. Most of the companies, they have this PDPA handbook. Basically, they're telling the employees what they're supposed to do in relation to handling personal data. Likewise, right now, when we are talking about cybersecurity, this is a law that has severe impact towards the organization, towards the directors, and everyone that's been involved. So it's very important for us to also prepare a relevant cybersecurity handbook specific for the industry, specific for the company, so that they would have a clear idea what is the right policy, what is the right procedures, and then what is the right processes in order for them to ensure they have the right education, the right awareness, and the right information concerning this law.
Those are really good recommendations. I hope you guys are taking notes. So Khai, wrap us up. Any final thoughts as we wrap up this discussion?
So definitely the introductions of the CSA is a very welcome approach, right? It's a very welcome step. Considering that our lives, pretty much, I think 90% of our time are spent online, or at least with some electronic devices. So the country as a whole stepping up the cybersecurity of critical sectors, NCII sectors, right, is definitely very, very crucial to ensure that we are always ready for the next wave of cyber threats. So for NCII entities, I think they should view this not as a challenge, not as just another additional obligations for them to comply with, but rather them being able to play a part in stepping up in enhancing the cybersecurity readiness of our country's critical sectors, right? And for all you know, if the cybersecurity readiness of our country as a whole can step up, that will naturally perhaps better position our country as a favorable potential investment destinations, right? By foreign investors. And that will naturally benefit local companies.
True.
For sure. So I think see it more as an opportunity rather than a hassle.
Yeah.
That's what I would really like to say.
Thanks, Johnson and Khai. That's all the time we have for our cybersecurity discussion. To our listeners, thank you for joining us in the first part and the second part of the cybersecurity 2024 discussion. This is just a starting point, like the gazetting of this act, and it will continue to evolve as NCII leads are being identified, NCII entities are being identified. There'll be more developments to be discussed. So to our listeners out there, if you've been listening for the past 2 episodes, this is just a friendly recommendation to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to our Spotify, and also follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram to get constant updates on laws like the CSA 2024. You've been listening to the Legal Insight podcast by HHQ, where we help you unpack the world of law, business, and tech. Stay informed and stay updated.